Hi, I'm Catherine, and it's really good to be sitting here with Fred. GenZero, just to give a bit of background, is a 3.6 billion investment company that is working towards a net zero world, and it received its initial commit from Temasek, which was already a global leader in climate tech investing. And when it announced GenZero in June, and GenZero is actually a wholly owned um, company of Temasek. So that leads into one of the questions I wanted to ask first of Fred is basically, yeah, just taking us back to the beginning. Why did Temasek decide to start GenZero, and what is GenZero doing that Temasek isn't already?
Well, Catherine, thank you very much. It's great to be here and to speak with all of you. Now, Temasek, as you know, has already taken a lot of steps in the past few years into making investments into the sustainability as well as clean energy and climate-related spaces. It is important for us to actually think about how to deploy capital in this space because obviously all of us are aware of the climate emergency, the fact that this is actually likely to be one of the most existential challenges of our generation. And it is important for us to be able to find solutions that can actually address many of these things, from global warming, sea level rises, the challenges to food production in a sustainable way. So we wanted to be able to have a dedicated capability to be able to access some of these decarbonization opportunities. And so Temasek decided to park aside a sizable amount of capital to be able to develop a team that would be able to focus on issues like the carbon markets, decarbonization technologies, as well as nature solutions. So that is the reason why I think we have established GenZero as a separate investment platform company.
Mhm.
So in our work, we have been looking at technology solutions such as low carbon materials and carbon capture capabilities, nature solutions that seek to protect and restore natural ecosystems, often with a view to generate carbon credits on top of that, as well as to invest into ecosystem enablers in the carbon market space. And the reason for that is because we think that in the near term, energy transition would require some form of participation from the carbon markets to allow people to gradually execute this transition. But we do need carbon markets to be credible, effective, transparent, high quality. And therefore, there is still investments needed in order to be able to improve capabilities and technologies and solutions in that space. So that is probably the reason for why we have GenZero.
Yeah, and I was wondering for companies out there that are curious about or thinking about trying to pitch themselves to you. I was wondering, what are some examples of your current portfolio companies?
Oh well, in the technology space, for example, we have invested in both funds as well as companies. So a major fund investment that we have made is into decarbonization partners, and that is basically a climate-focused decarb fund that is a joint venture between Temasek and BlackRock, and we are an LP investor in that, and they are focused on late venture, early growth opportunities, right, across different areas in the decarbonization space. We have also invested into a technology company called New Light, which seeks to be able to produce bioplastics from captured methane. On the nature side, obviously, we have been investing into a few forestry projects that generate carbon credits. And then on the carbon market side, we count among our portfolio companies things like South Pole, which is a global leader in providing project advisory, technical advisory solutions and project development for companies seeking to embark on a net zero or decarbonization journey, as well as a carbon exchange called Climate Impact X, which is headquartered here in Singapore.
Yeah, and then I was wondering, yeah, just also for companies that are curious about potentially getting investment from you, I was wondering what kind of investment stage does GenZero typically look at?
I think we are kind of flexible. For very early stage companies, say around the Series A or just before, we will work with different partners to be able to evaluate and deploy capital to support early stage companies. But I think Catherine, it's important for us to kind of understand why we need to do this now.
Mm-hmm.
if we think about the broader net zero decarbonization challenge, everybody talks about this 2050 timeline, right? To get to net zero.
Yeah.
But the reality is that if we want to create significant climate impact by 2050, we are looking at new solutions that must already somewhat exist today or starting to come into being today, right? Because we would need about like another 10, 15 years for the technologies and solutions to mature, to get to a stage where they could be commercialized, and then probably another 10 to 15 years for it to actually be able to be deployed and create some kind of impact. So that basically means that this current cohort of young companies are going to be the ones that are going to make a difference, to the 2050 agenda. And that is the reason why I think we are very excited to participate in this space right now, because the action must take place now in order to have any meaningful difference by 2050.
Yeah, and I was wondering, even with that, considering that, in the companies like where with a lot of your technology not coming to fruition till then, or making actionable, like you've seen results by then. I was wondering, in light of that, what kind of metrics and milestones does GenZero like to see companies bring to the table before you consider adding them to your portfolio?
Right. I think it goes back to the way that we evaluate our performance at GenZero. So we have a double bottom line. So our shareholder expects us to be able to obviously achieve some level of financial returns. That's a given.
Yeah.
But we also take the idea around measuring climate impact rather seriously. So we try and understand, for example, the kind of the climate impact that a solution, if successfully deployed, the kind of climate impact that could be able to achieve. We also look at the kind of carbon yield that the company or the solution would be able to deliver. Like, for example, for every dollar of invested capital, how much carbon bang for the buck can we actually get? Right? Because obviously many solutions could be practical, cost-effective, and great. But for every dollar of invested capital, how much carbon impact can we actually achieve on a per annum or cumulative basis? And so that is actually one metric that we think about, because capital is going to be finite. We also have very limited time to be able to achieve a significant amount of climate impact, to be able to address the climate change challenge. And so it is vitally important for us to understand how to deploy capital into the areas that will make the most meaningful difference.
Yeah, sorry, and how do you do that?
So in terms of the analysis that we take, I think we try to, first of all, understand whether the particular solution itself is delivering a direct kind of a carbon impact, a facilitative, enabling, or indirect kind of carbon impact, or something where when we're investing, it may not yet reach any kind of commercialization, but we are able to catalyze the development of this particular solution by, for example, bending the cost curve down faster than it otherwise would be able to. So these are a combination of, for example, outside-in analysis from a technical or engineering perspective, as well as looking at the kind of projections that the company is able to provide us, and also then wrapping it around and kind of an economic analysis to understand whether or not this is actually cost-effective or feasible. So this involves understanding the MAC curves of the solution, and also because we are participating in the carbon markets and deepening our understanding of that space, that we have a view around the forward carbon price to understand whether the cost curves actually match what customers would be willing to pay at that point in time in the future.
And I want to go back to a point that I was actually curious about, where you mentioned looking at companies at like their carbon offset per dollar invested. Yeah, I was wondering, how are you able to determine that?
Not carbon offset per dollar, but carbon impact per dollar.
Carbon impact per dollar. Yes, sorry. Yeah, I was wondering, how do you determine that?
Well, put it this way. If, for example, we are investing, hypothetically, let's imagine that we're investing into a company that, say, we put $100 million into a company, and it is able to produce enough widgets that actually take out carbon from the air, right? And they are able to make, I would imagine, say 10 widgets a year, and the 10 widgets are able to collectively remove 1 million tons of carbon from the air, right, a year, right? So therefore, there is a sense that therefore that is the carbon yield for my invested capital of say $100 million or whatever it is, and assume that that is 100% of the company, then that delivers that 1 million ton in the year one of carbon impact. And that is the carbon yield, 1 million tons over $100 million of invested capital. So this is slightly different from the idea of buying a carbon credit or having a carbon price at a spot rate. In other words, if I were to go out there and I were to buy a carbon credit, how much that would cost. We are talking about the invested capital so that there is a certain recurrent impact that you are trying to achieve with the company and to establish what that is. Somewhat analogous to this would be, for example, when some of the investors in more mature assets look at dividend yield. And say for every dollar that you're putting into the bank or into a mature stock, what kind of dividend or interest would you be able to get out of it every year? And that is a little bit of that carbon yield type of analysis that we look at in order to understand the recurrent, ongoing climate impact from the investment that we are making.
Yeah. And then one of the questions I wanted to ask you was in terms of like moving towards net zero in Singapore and the rest of the world. What are some of the challenges that you see, and how do you think startups could address those challenges?
Well, I think that oftentimes one of the major issues that come up in conversations is about the fact that new solutions that help with decarbonization would be more expensive. Right?
Yeah.
And therefore, obviously, what startups or technology development can do is actually to improve the cost curve and make that trade-off more acceptable. In other words, that consumers, clients, customers no longer have to make this impossible choice between wanting to do something right for the planet and then worrying about whether they are going to have to pay more for their solutions. That is an impossible choice. Now, but in the longer run, I would expect that actually green solutions, clean solutions are not going to be more expensive. And in reality, we already have examples today. Solar, for example, is one of the cheapest ways to produce electricity in the world, right? And the price of solar panels actually have come down more than 99% over the past 40 years. So actually, we do have solutions that are actually cheaper and cleaner. Now, of course, not enough of them exist. And that's the reason why we have, the energy, passion, innovation from startups to be able to find better ways of solving some of these core challenges. And so that is one thing, to be able to get rid of this impossible choice between paying a premium and having cleaner solutions. The second thing, of course, is that, and that is somewhat outside the hands of our startup community, and that is for governments and others to be able to price carbon as an externality properly. Without a proper carbon price, it is almost impossible for us to make sense of why people would want to invest into new solutions and to be able to have them at scale. So we are also trying to be able to, kind of like watch for the regulatory developments and policy developments all across the world. And in Singapore, I think we have made a very important step by announcing a massive increase in our carbon tax rate from just 5 Singapore dollars today per ton, right, for some of our top emitters, to 25 Singapore dollars a ton in 2 years' time in 2024. And that number is going to go up to 40 Singapore dollars a ton by 2026, and then possibly from 50 to 80 dollars per ton in Singapore dollar terms by 2030. Now, that represents a major increase in carbon pricing for Singapore. But the idea is that would catalyze more innovative solutions to be introduced in a cost-effective manner, right, for us.
Yeah, one of the questions I wanted to ask in terms of working with startups, especially for long term, is that I think it's fair to describe GenZero as like an active investor in that you work closely with startups. And even as some of their work might take a while to come into fruition, the things that they're developing. So I was wondering, what kind of support do you give startups, and what kind of value add are you able to support them with?
I think that we work with a range of different companies, whether they are very, very early stage startups or they are slightly further along on the journey. But I think that there are a few things that I think where we hope to be able to bring value to our partners. The first one is actually a more considered view around how the carbon markets and developments around carbon are taking place across the world. Because at the end of the day, if we are solving for a decarbonization challenge or a climate change challenge, then understanding how we are underwriting investments, how we are thinking about the movement of carbon price, and how people are thinking about decarbonization strategies, policies are being introduced will be important. And I think GenZero hopefully will be able to provide a useful perspective on that front. The second aspect of it is that GenZero is not alone. We do not profess to be the only game in town. We are not the only game in town. There are many others who are actually doing great work in this space. And we often want to think about how we are able to foster a sense of partnership, a kind of an open architecture type of an ecosystem in the way that we are able to partner each other dynamically in order to find new and interesting solutions, and more importantly, ways of actually applying them. It is not good enough for us to come up with great ideas. It is much more important to think about how we can actually get those ideas deployed, used, and scaled. And so, as being part of a broader Temasek ecosystem here in Singapore and globally, we think that we have a network of relationships and contacts that might be quite useful for our startups to either try out their solutions, bounce ideas, get some of their solutions implemented, and also to be able to find other sources of financing and support on their journey of growth.
Oh yeah, so if you could tell me more about this network of support.
Well, I mean, like we do have Temasek portfolio companies in a whole range of different industries, right? That could certainly use, innovative decarbonization solutions. Whether, for example, airlines linking about sustainable aviation fuel, or some of our utility companies looking at carbon capture capabilities, right? So there is that opportunity to be able to deploy some of these solutions across that network, or certainly to make those introductions and get actual practitioners and operating companies to provide that feedback on what would be needed for some of these solutions to scale and be effective. And oftentimes, I think we are also talking to a broader network of fund managers and fellow investors. And therefore, through that collective understanding of issues, we hope to be able to value add to some of our partners.
Okay. And then I was wondering, just for the founders listening into this, what do you think, what kind of opportunities do you think there are for startups in climate tech, or which ones in particular are you excited about?
I think limitless. I think the ones that we are obviously watching for in the technology space includes some of the carbon capture, carbon removal technologies, low carbon fuels, low carbon materials, and in particular in the nearer term, probably things to do with a hydrogen transition that I think would be quite meaningful in terms of being able to push the envelope by around 2030 or so. I think that there are also a lot of opportunities in supporting nature solutions. It is a class of investments and opportunities that many investors and corporates might be less familiar with. But nature is as important as technology in trying to solve for near-term decarbonization. And then obviously, finally, into the carbon market space, I think we do need a lot more capabilities in the MRV space. These are the ones where are doing monitoring, reporting, and verification of carbon projects, carbon rating, carbon project rating capabilities to be able to improve the transparency, credibility, and quality assurance in the carbon market space. But let me end off by just saying one thing. There is always a tendency for us to think about digital solutions and software solutions to be able to solve this. And they are vitally important because they seek to optimize. And if you do not digitalize, you cannot optimize, right? And energy efficiency and many of these things are so critical to this decarbonization space. But I will certainly have a shout out and encourage many of our founders in the room to also think about, the core engineering, the tougher kinds of solution sets that we need. Because at the end of the day, even as you optimize, somebody has got to fundamentally do something about taking the carbon out, about improving the core underlying engineering efficiency of some of our solutions. So that's tougher to do. I think sometimes maybe, depending on your point of view, as sexy or not as sexy, but it is vitally important. And I think, therefore, there is actually a space for many of us with varied interests to be able to tackle this climate crisis.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us, Frederick. It was good to talk to you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.